All right, getting into it here as we continue to dig through the second hour now. My next guest, John Eichelberger, is joining us as a former Pennsylvania State Senator, Pennsylvania State Co-Chair for U.S. term limits. And listen, this is something I have not always supported. I believe term limits are dictated by elections, but more and more you have to ask yourself, should there be term limits? Was the election a turning point for term limits? He joins me now, John Eichelberger. John, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, I thought that, the idea that term limits should be imposed upon Americans, I thought was bad because I thought if you had somebody that was really good, you'd like to keep them and you wouldn't be allowed to. But the more money I see piled into these races, and I mean $100 million for a Senate race, $1.5 billion for one side of a presidential race. The money is out of control, which means the messaging is, it's everywhere, John. And so tell me why term limits are so important to you. Is it the money? Is it the politics? Is it the entrenched, deep state? What is it?
Well, it's all of those things. It's very difficult, particularly with legislative races, to unseat an incumbent. I mean, very, very difficult. They lose at 1 or 2% rate. Compared to a lot of local offices, maybe there's maybe as much as a third turnover with county commissioners in Pennsylvania, for example, things like that. But in legislative races, it's 1 or 2% are beaten at the polls. The money is sometimes insurmountable, and just the dogmatic approach that we have to legislation. We have the same people in there for long periods of time. Things don't change as rapidly as they should. Fresh ideas don't come about. There's all sorts of issues with seniority, the way the systems work. We don't have the best and brightest at the top. It's just the way the system is currently working is not, I think, the way the founding fathers would like to see it work.
They didn't have term limits, though, the founding fathers. Speaking of that, did they?
They didn't, but they discussed it. There was a lot of support for it. The Federalist Papers discussed it. There's a lot of history supporting term limits. I don't think that at the time they envisioned, because of the way the people worked at the time, and they couldn't leave their farms and their businesses for long periods. They thought people would go in for a brief period, stay for a term or two, go back to their businesses, their families. It was, I don't think, was ever envisioned that we would end up with the system that we have today. And another point is that the American public supports this. The latest Pew poll shows 87% across all party lines support term limits for Congress.
Well, that in of itself is interesting, but not determinative for me. Fair enough. I think it's small states that stand to lose more. A state like North or South Dakota or Utah, one of the states that has, a lot lower population. If you have something that's really good from one of those states, you want to keep them because they're a senior senator or so forth, they get pulled out. I can see the argument against it. In fact, I've often supported the arguments against term limits, but based on what I've seen recently, I might be having a crack in my armor. We'll just see where that goes. But isn't it more hurtful to small states? Big states like New York, they just push through the next and the next and the next. Big state like California just push through the next, the next, and the next. And what they stand for doesn't really change, right?
Well, representing the interests of people is one thing. Having the influence and the seniority and that's a different issue. Once people, as a former legislator myself, I've seen people at the state capitol, and I'm sure it's multiplied at the federal level. The influence, the lobbyists, for example, don't want to see term limits. It's interesting. People think, well, lobbyists would be for term limits. They'd like to be able to go after people. They form these relationships. It takes a lot of money and some time that they invest to form these relationships with legislators when they're in office. And they don't want that interrupted. Once they have people that they know that they can influence, they want to keep them there and continue to influence them. It's a system that once you're in for long enough and you get further and further away from the people in your district, your family, your jobs. Think how many people in Washington or in state capitals have broken marriages. That's a a small example of what happens. Once you're away from home, away from your business, away from your family, away from your community, you lose those relationships. They're not as important anymore as the inner circle. That beltway mentality that we hear about all the time takes over, and the people that influence you in that beltway takes over. So it's not a good thing for the United States when that is the mindset of the folks that are in Washington.
So I guess this is the way we break that, John. Real quickly, what are your proposed term limits for? We got about 1 minute. So for U.S. Senator, how long?
We're looking at 12 years, two terms, and 3 terms for a House member.
And how did you arrive at those? So 6 years in Congress, 12 years in Senate, 18 years total.
Right, and that would be that's flexible. I mean, the people could make that decision. We're not married to any particular limit, but that seems to be what the talking points usually are when you talk to folks about the issue.
All right, 2 terms here, 3 terms there, but it's negotiable. All right, I think the Congress 3 terms you're just starting to figure it out after. I mean, they're short terms, only 2 years each, right? So basically, 3 terms in Congress is 1 term as a senator. What's it going to take to get it there? Give you the final word.
We need to get some more folks involved. We have a lot of support across the country where states are passing resolutions to force Congress to make that decision, or the states can make that decision on their own. It's an Article 5 issue, and it could be addressed if we can get some more states to address it. There's a lot that have already done so. We had 2 more join this year that passed resolutions, so we're on the upswing. J.D. Vance was a signer of a pledge when he was in the Senate. Trump has been supportive of it.
You've got people behind you. Well, good to know. John Eichelberger, former Pennsylvania State Senator, Pennsylvania State Co-Chair for U.S. Term Limits. This conversation's getting warmer, John, that's for sure. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.